She was always the practice run, Kyle said, his voice carrying clear and cold across the moonlit courtyard. And Maren was the real thing. I only kept the elder sister around until the true one was ready. Behind the stone pillar where she stood, Elowen felt the bond that had lived beneath her ribs for 2 years snap like a bowstring pulled past its limit. The pain was physical, a searing cord tearing loose somewhere in her chest, and she pressed her palm flat against the cold granite to keep from folding. Blood rushed and then drained from her face, leaving her lips numb, her fingertips tingling. In 3 hours she was meant to walk the length of the great hall in white and stand before the pack and become his queen. She did not scream. She did not step out from behind the pillar and demand an explanation. She simply closed her eyes, felt the last warm thread of him die inside her, and made a single silent vow. If she was only ever the practice, then let him spend the rest of his life learning what he had discarded. The moonlight over the fortress of Draymore was pale and merciless that night, spilling across the ancient courtyard where Elowen had first been presented to the AlphaKing 2 years earlier. She had been 18 then, brought from the border villages with her younger sister Maren, both of them daughters of a minor bloodline that had served the crown for generations. Kyle Draymore had looked at her once across a firelit table and named her his intended, and the whole pack had celebrated the union as a mending of old wounds between the throne and the outer territories. She had believed it. She had believed all of it. She had learned his moods and soothed his rages, had sat awake through the long, fevered nights when the wound in his side from the northern wars refused to close, had ground the herbs and brewed the tinctures that no court healer had managed to make work. She had rebuilt the treasury ledgers with her own hand when the steward's incompetence nearly bankrupted the crown, and she had done it quietly, letting the credit fall to men who would never have thanked her. She had loved him with the whole of a heart that had never before been given away, and she had thought, foolishly, that the mate bond humming between them meant that he loved her back. Now she understood that the bond had been one-sided all along. A wolf could feel the pull and refuse to answer it. Kyle had felt her and chosen, coldly and deliberately, to feel nothing in return. She stayed behind the pillar long enough to hear the rest, because a wound, half known, is a wound that festers, and she had decided, in that first shattering instant, that she would take the whole truth with her when she left. Maren's laugh floated out into the night, bright and careless, the laugh of a girl who had gotten everything she wanted. "You'll break it to her gently, won't you?" her sister said, and there was no gentleness in the words at all, only performance. "She's given so much. It would be cruel to just cast her out." "She'll understand duty," Kyle answered. She always understood duty. That was her use. Her use. Elowen turned the phrase over in the cold air, and found it did not surprise her as much as it should. She thought of all the mornings she had risen before the servants to warm his study before he woke, all the councils where she had fed him the words that made him sound wise, all the nights she had held him through the terrors that came when the war dreams took him. Use. She had been a tool laid conveniently to hand, and now a shinier tool had been polished up and set before him, and he would trade one for the other without a second thought. She did not confront them. Confrontation was what they expected. Confrontation would give them the satisfaction of watching her break, would let them cast her as the hysterical, rejected woman, would give Kyle the excuse he plainly wanted to strip her of dignity as well as title. She had watched him do this to enemies before, provoke them into an outburst and then use the outburst to justify their ruin. She would not hand him the weapon. Instead, she walked back through the servants' passage, her slippers silent on the worn stone, and she went up to the chambers that had been hers, and she sat down on the edge of the great carved bed, and she breathed, in and out. Slowly, the severed bond ached like a missing limb, a phantom pain that flared every time her mind reached instinctively for the warm presence that had lived at the edge of her awareness for 2 years, and now found only cold, empty air. She let herself feel it fully, once, because she knew she would not permit herself to feel it again. Then she opened her eyes, and she began, methodically, to plan her disappearance. She had a secret. It was a small secret, and a new one, only 3 weeks old, and she had not yet found the moment to tell him. That afternoon she had suspected. That evening she had grown certain. There was a child. His child. The heir the pack had prayed for through 2 barren years, growing quietly beneath her heart while its father stood in the courtyard and called its mother a practice run. She pressed one hand flat against her belly and made a second vow, harder and colder than the first. This child would never know Cale Draymore as a father who could be commanded. This child would grow up free and strong, and beholden to no throne that had thrown its mother away like a broken tool. She would not tell him. She would take the heir, and she would go, and one day, when it suited her, and not before, the Alpha King of Draymore would learn exactly what he had let walk out of his gates in the dark. She had been preparing for this longer than she consciously knew. That was the thing about clever women married into cruel houses. Some part of them always keeps a door unlocked. Over the 2 years she had squirreled away a fortune that no one had noticed, because no one ever noticed her. When she had reorganized the treasury, she had also quietly established, under a merchant name that meant nothing to anyone at court, a series of holdings in the free city of Varomir, 3 days' hard ride to the south, beyond the reach of the pack's territory. A trading concern, a warehouse, a modest house on a quiet street, coin enough to live on for years, and enough besides to begin something of her own. She had told herself, when she set it up, that it was only prudence, only the ledger-keeper's instinct to hedge against disaster. She saw now that some deeper wisdom in her had known all along what Kyle was, even when her heart refused to hear it. She changed out of the fine gown she had worn to the pre-wedding feast, and into plain travelling clothes, wool and leather, the sort of thing a merchant's factor might wear on the road. She took nothing that Kyle had given her. Not the jewels, not the silver comb, not the fur-lined cloak with the royal sigil worked into the collar. She left them all laid out on the bed, as if for a servant to put away, and she took only what was hers, what she had earned or brought or made. She hesitated over one thing, a small carved wolf that Kyle had whittled for her in the early days, before he became king in full, when he had still seemed capable of tenderness. She held it in her palm for a long moment. Then she set it down on the pillow, gently, and left it behind with everything else that had been a lie. There was a knock at the door, soft, 3 taps and a pause and 2 more, the pattern of the only person in the fortress she trusted. She opened it to Bram, the old kennel master, grey-bearded and stooped and possessed of eyes that missed nothing. He had served the Draymore line since before Cale was whelped. He looked at her travelling clothes and at the jewels laid out on the bed, and his weathered face folded into something like grief. "You heard?" he said. It was not a question. "I heard." Bram stepped inside and closed the door. "The whole pack thinks you'll be queen by dawn. Half of them love you. The steward, the healers, the border captains, every soul in this place you ever helped. If you cried out, if you told them what he said in that courtyard, there'd be blood on the stones by morning. And that is exactly why I will not, Elowen said. I won't be the crack that shatters this pack. Let him have his throne and his practice-run bride. I have somewhere else to be. She paused. Will you help me, Bram? There's a horse I'll need, and I'd rather leave through the kennels than the gate. The old man's jaw worked. Then he nodded, once, decisively, the nod of a man choosing a side he had chosen long ago in his heart. There's a mare, gentle-gaited, sure on the mountain roads. I'll have her saddled and the back postern unlocked within the hour. And Elowen. He hesitated, then reached inside his coat and drew out a folded paper, worn soft at the creases. I don't know what this is worth to you, but I've kept it. When the old king died, before Kyle took the crown proper, there was a charter. A grant of independent standing to the free city of Varomir, and any who took citizenship there, signed and sealed by the old king's own hand, exempting them from pack law and any claim of the Draymore throne. Kale never ratified the new charters when he ascended. This one still stands. Legally, anyone under Varomir's protection is beyond his reach entirely. I kept it because I never liked how easily that boy learned to throw people away. He pressed the folded charter into her hands. Now go before the moon sets, and don't you dare look back. She looked at the old man who had shown her more loyalty in 1 hour than the king had shown her in 2 years, and she felt her composure waver for the first time. She caught it. She folded the charter and slid it into the breast of her coat, next to the vow she carried and the child she carried, and she said simply, "Thank you, Bram. I'll not forget it." Then she followed him down the winding servants' stair, through the warm hay smell of the kennels, where the great wolves of the pack raised their heads, and watched her pass in silent, solemn ranks, and out through the small iron postern, into the cold and the dark and the open road. The mare was there, saddled and patient. Elowen mounted, gathered the reins, and for one last moment looked up at the black bulk of the fortress rising against the stars, at the single lit window that was Kale's study, where even now he was perhaps rehearsing the gentle lie he meant to feed her at dawn. She felt the phantom ache of the severed bond, and beneath it, something new and hard and clean, like the first ice of winter forming over dark water. Then she turned the mare south and rode away from Draymore and the man who had called her a tool, and she did not look back, and she did not cry, and by the time the sun found the mountain passes, she was already gone, and the great fortress woke to find its bride vanished and its future rewritten, and no one in all that ancient house understood. Yet, what had truly walked out of its gates in the dark? Dawn broke over Draymore to chaos. The servants who came to dress the bride found only jewels laid out on an empty bed and a small carved wolf on the pillow. The word spread through the fortress like fire through dry grass. The bride was gone. Kyle was informed while he stood being fitted for his wedding finery, and the messenger flinched from his face as he delivered it. For a moment, the Alpha King said nothing at all. Then he laughed, short and dismissive, and told them she had lost her nerve, that she had never truly understood her place, that the wedding would proceed as planned, with the proper bride. He said it with such certainty that no one dared contradict him. Maren, when she heard, allowed herself a small private smile, and thought that her sister had made everything remarkably easy. Only old Bram, sweeping the kennels with an old man's slow deliberation, kept his own counsel and his own smile, and thought that some debts take years to come due, but always, always come. They searched, of course, in a desultory way, because a runaway bride was an embarrassment, and Kyle didn't like embarrassments. They sent riders along the northern roads toward her home villages, assuming she would flee back to the safety of her father's house. They found nothing, because she had gone south, and no one at Draymore had the imagination to look toward the free city where a nameless merchant's factor had quietly built a life against exactly this day. Within a week, the search was abandoned. Within a month, the wedding of Cale Draymore and Maren of the Border bloodline was celebrated, with feasting that rang hollow to those who remembered the woman who had truly held the fortress together. And if the treasury ledgers began almost immediately to slide into the disorder from which Elowen had rescued them, no one connected the decline to the absence of the quiet elder sister. The pack settled into its new arrangement. The world outside remained entirely ignorant of what it had just lost. Elowen reached Varamir on the third day, saddle-sore and hollow-eyed and utterly composed. The free city rose out of the river valley like something from a different age, all pale stone and slate roofs and the ceaseless bustle of a place that answered to no crown, only to coin and craft and the long, slow negotiation of 100 trading houses. She rode through its gates as an anonymous traveller, and by nightfall she was sitting in the modest house on the quiet street that she had bought with money no one knew she had, under a name no one connected to the vanished bride of the AlphaKing. She lit a fire. She ate bread and cheese. She laid her hand on her belly, and she said aloud, for the first time, "It's only us now, and that will be enough. I promise you that will be enough." Then she slept, and if she dreamed of a courtyard and a cold voice and a bond snapping in the moonlight, she did not speak of it in the morning. 6 months passed, and they did not pass gently, and they did not pass in vain. The first weeks were the hardest, the body remaking itself around the child, the grief surfacing at odd hours in waves she could not always master. But Elowen had never been a woman who waited to be rescued, and she did not wait now. She had a warehouse and a trading concern that had been ticking along quietly under a hired manager, and she took it in hand the way she had once taken the treasury of Draymore in hand, and she made it sing. She had an eye for the flow of goods that no man in Varamir could match, a memory for prices and seasons, and the small human details that turned a fair deal into a great one. Within 3 months, the concern had doubled its trade. Within 5, she had bought out 2 rivals and a second warehouse, and had begun to be spoken of in the counting houses and the merchants' halls as a rising power, a factor of uncanny instinct, a woman who had appeared from nowhere and was quietly reshaping the river trade around herself. They called her Mistress Vane, for that was the name on her papers, and they did not know she had once been meant to be a queen. She liked it that way. In Varamir, a person was worth exactly what they built, and not 1 coin more, and after 2 years of pouring herself into a man who valued her only for her use, there was a fierce, clean joy in being valued for what she did. She grew round with the child and worked through it, negotiating deals with one hand pressed to the small of her aching back, and the merchants of the free city learned quickly that the pregnancy dulled none of her edge. If anything, it sharpened her. She was building not just a fortune now, but a legacy, a foundation for the small, fierce life that grew stronger inside her every day, and there is no motivation on earth quite like the future of a child. She was not entirely alone. In her 2nd month in the city, she had done business with a shipping house run by a man named Torvald Asker, a broad, quiet northerner with sea-grey eyes and a reputation for absolute honesty in a trade not known for it. He had come to her warehouse, expecting to negotiate with the famous Mistress Vane's husband or father or some other man, and had found instead a pregnant woman with a ledger and a stare that missed nothing, and to his eternal credit he had not blinked. He had simply sat down across from her and done business, and he had lost, cleanly and good-naturedly, because she was better than him, and they both knew it. He had come back the next week for another try, and lost again, and somewhere in the third or fourth losing they had become friends. He respected her the way she had always deserved to be respected, for her mind and her competence and her spine, and he asked nothing of her that she did not offer freely. When the child came at last, in the deep cold of midwinter, it was Torvald who fetched the midwife, and Torvald who paced outside the door, and it was into a world with at least one good, steady man in it that the child was born. A son. She named him Rowan. He came into the world with a shock of dark hair and his father's storm-grey eyes, and a cry that filled the whole house, and when the midwife laid him on Eloin's chest, she felt something in her that the severed bond had broken, knit itself back together around this new, small, fierce love. She held him and she wept, at last, the tears she had refused herself for 6 months, and they were not tears of grief, but of a joy so ferocious it frightened her. "I have you," she whispered against his downy head. "I have you. I have you. You're safe. No one will ever throw us away again." Outside the snow fell soft and silent over Varamir, and 3 days' ride to the north, the Alpha King of Draymore slept in ignorance beside the wrong bride, and couldn't feel, the birth of the heir he had prayed for, and would never know he had. It was Torvald who first brought her word of what was happening at Draymore, and he brought it carefully, watching her face. He had connections in the Pack territories through his shipping trade, and the news that trickled down the river was not good. For Kyle, though Eloin found she could hear it now, without the bond aching, without anything aching at all, the treasury of Draymore was in ruin. The steward, freed from the quiet corrections of the woman everyone had overlooked, had run the accounts into a swamp of debt and mismanagement, and the debts had been called in by creditors who smelled weakness. The border captains, who had trusted the fair dealings of the vanished elder sister, found the new administration grasping and capricious, and began quietly to withdraw their loyalty. Maren, it seemed, was a decorative queen, and nothing more, interested in feasts and finery, and the performance of power, but wholly incapable of its substance. She had emptied the last of the treasury on her coronation splendors, and had no idea how to fill it again. And she had begun, in the way of hollow people, to blame everyone around her for the collapse she did not understand. "There's more," Torvald said, and here his voice grew careful. "The debts didn't just happen. Someone's been buying them up. All of them. Quietly, through intermediaries, consolidating every claim against the Draymore throne into a single hand. Someone means to own that pack outright, and Kyle's too proud and too distracted to see the noose being woven around his neck." He set down the letter he had been reading from and looked at her. "Whoever it is, they're patient, and they're rich, and they play a long game. I don't like it. A collapsing pack is dangerous to everyone downriver, us included. If Draymore falls to some predator, half the border trade goes with it." Eloin sat very still, rocking Rowan gently against her shoulder, and turned this new information over with the same cold clarity she had brought to everything since the night in the courtyard. A patient predator, buying up the throne's debts. A greater game beneath the small, ugly one that had consumed her life. She had assumed, these 6 months, that Cale's ruin was simply the natural consequence of his own stupidity, the treasury unraveling because the hand that had held it together was gone, But this was something else. This was design. Someone had been waiting for Draymore to weaken, perhaps had even helped it along, and now moved to close the trap. "Find out who," she said. Torvald raised an eyebrow. "You've spent 6 months not looking north. Why look now?" "Because," Elowen said, and she laid one hand over Rowan's small, warm back. "Whatever happens to Draymore happens to my son's birthright, whether he ever claims it or not. I walked away from Kale. I didn't walk away from what is my child's by blood. If someone means to devour that pack, I'd rather know their face before they know mine." She did not say the rest of it, the deeper thing that had begun to move in her chest, quiet and patient as the predator to the north. That she had spent 6 months building exactly the kind of power that could buy debts and consolidate claims and reshape the fate of a pack. That the woman Kyle had called a tool had become, without anyone at Draymore noticing, a force that could reach out and hold his entire world in the palm of her hand. She had not decided yet what she would do with that. But she had decided she would find out who else was reaching for the same thing. The answer, when Torvald's inquiries finally ran it to ground some weeks later, was a name that turned Elowen cold in a way that the 6 months of hard-won peace had not prepared her for. The debts of the Draymore throne were being bought by an agent acting for Lord Sabin Vael, master of the great southern trading combine that dominated the lower river, a man whose reach Elowen had been quietly circling in her own rise without ever coming into direct conflict. Sabin Vael was the largest single power in the region that was not a pack or a crown, a spider sitting at the center of a web of coin and contracts and quiet threats, and he had apparently decided that the ancient wolf throne of Draymore, with its territory and its timber and its command of the northern passes, was a prize worth the patient work of years. He had not caused Kyle's marriage to Maren, but he had watched the elder sister's departure with great interest, Torvald's sources reported, for it was known in the right circles that she alone had held the treasury together, and her disappearance had been the crack Sabine needed to begin his slow demolition. "He's going to force a default," Torvald said grimly. "Call every debt at once, when Kyle can't possibly pay, and take the pack's holdings as forfeit. He'll leave Kyle the empty title of king and own everything the title stands on. It's elegant, it's evil, and it's nearly done." He hesitated. "There's a council coming. All the creditors summoned to Draymore to present their claims 1 month from now. Sabin means to spring it there, in the great hall, in front of the whole pack. Public humiliation as a tool of conquest. He'll break Kale in front of everyone he rules, and take the throne's wealth in the same stroke." Elowen listened to all of it, and she thought about the great hall where she had been meant to become a queen, and she thought about Sabin Vael planning to make it the stage for a conquest, and she thought about the charter folded in the breast of her coat that placed her forever beyond the reach of the Draymore throne, and slowly, coldly, a plan assembled itself in her mind with the clean inevitability of a ledger balancing. She had the money. Over 6 months, she had built a fortune that rivaled the smaller trading houses, and she had built more than money. She had built a reputation for reliability, and a network of allies among the free city merchants who trusted Mistress Vane in a way they trusted no one else. If she moved fast, if she moved secretly, she could reach the creditors before Sabine closed his fist. She could buy the debts of Draymore out from under him, not to conquer the pack, to hold it, to be the hand that decided its fate, so that when the council came and Sabin Vael reached for his prize, he would find that someone had reached it first. "I want to buy the Draymore debts," she said. "All of them. Before the council. Quietly. Can it be done? Torvald stared at her. That would take nearly everything you've built, and it would put you directly against Sabine Vael, who has crushed larger houses than yours for less. Then it's fortunate, Elowen said, that he has no idea I exist, and that Kael Draymore thinks I'm a coward hiding in my father's house, and that not one soul in all this river valley knows that Mistress Vane was ever anything but a merchant. I've been underestimated my whole life, Torvald. It's the only weapon that's never failed me. She looked down at Rowan, sleeping in the crook of her arm, and her voice went quiet and hard. He called me a practice run. He said my only use was duty. Let's find out how useful I can be. What followed was a month of the most intense and secret work of Elowen's life. She liquidated holdings, called in favors, leveraged her reputation to its absolute limit, and moved through intermediaries so carefully layered that no watcher of Sabine Vael's could have traced the buying back to a single source. The creditors of Draymore, most of them minor houses, frightened of the collapsing pack and eager to be rid of risky paper, were only too glad to sell their debts for ready coin, and they did not question the anonymous buyer who paid promptly and asked no favors. One by one, the claims against the throne of Draymore passed into Elowen's hands, and Sabine Vael, so confident in his patient web that he had not thought to move quickly, found in the last week before the council that the paper he had meant to sweep up in a single grasp had already, mysteriously, been swept up by another. He was furious. He was also, for the first time in years, uncertain, because he could not learn who had done it, and a spider that cannot see its rival cannot spin its trap. He came to the Draymore Council anyway, because his pride demanded it, and because he still held enough of the debt to make trouble. But he came off balance, and that was exactly as Elowen had planned. She travelled north with Torvald and a small trusted retinue, and she left Rowan safe in Varomir with a nurse she trusted, and Torvald's own sister to guard him, because she would not bring her son within a mile of Kael Draymore until the day she chose. She rode the mountain roads she had fled 6 months before, in the other direction now, and where she had left as a broken bride in the dark, she returned as a power in the daylight, in a fine dark coat with the ledger of an entire pack's fate in her saddlebags. She did not feel triumphant. She felt calm and clear and very slightly sad, the way one feels returning to the site of an old grief that no longer has the power to wound. The severed bond did not ache. She reached inside herself for it, once, on the mountain road, and found only the clean scar where it had been, and she was glad. The great hall of Draymore was exactly as she remembered it. The high timber beams, the ancient banners, the long table where she had first been named the king's intended, and it was full to bursting on the day of the council, the whole pack packed along the walls, the creditors seated at the great table, Kyle on his throne at the head, with Maren beside him, in a gown too fine for a treasury that could no longer afford it. Elowen entered late and unremarked, a merchant among merchants, her face composed, her hood back, and she watched from the side of the hall as Sabine Vael rose to make his move. He was a smooth, grey, elegant man, Sabine Vael, and he spoke with the confidence of one who has never lost, laying out before the assembled pack the full extent of the Draymore debt, the mismanagement, the ruin. He built his case brick by brick, humiliation by humiliation, and Kyle, on his throne, grew paler and stiffer with every word, and Maren beside him looked from face to face with the dawning fear of someone who has finally understood that the game is real. Sabine let it build. He was an artist of the killing stroke. And then, When the hall was silent and Kyle was cornered, he delivered it. "Your Majesty," he said, with exquisite courtesy, "the debts of your throne fall due today, in full, and cannot be paid. By the terms your own steward signed, the holdings of Draymore are therefore forfeit to the creditors. I hold the largest share of those debts, and I am prepared to be generous. Surrender the timber rights, the pass tolls, and the treasury lands to my house. Retain your title, and we need speak no more of this unpleasantness." He smiled. "Unless, of course, another creditor wishes to speak." The hall held its breath. Kyle's hands gripped the arms of his throne, and for the first time, Elowen saw in his face the thing she had waited 6 months to see. The understanding that he had been outplayed, that his pride had led him into a trap, that everything his line had built was about to slip through his fingers. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it steadied her further into the cold, clear place from which she meant to act. She stepped forward from the wall. "Another creditor wishes to speak," she said. Every head in the hall turned. She walked down the length of the great hall, the same length she had once been meant to walk in white, and she felt the weight of the pack's eyes, and did not falter, and she stopped before the great table and set her ledger upon it. Sabin Vael's smooth face registered the first flicker of alarm, because he didn't know her, and a player he didn't know was the one thing in the world he feared. Kyle's face registered nothing at all for a long moment, because 6 months, and a merchant's coat, and the absolute confidence of a woman who had built her own power had rendered the practice run he had discarded almost unrecognizable. Then recognition came, and with it a shock so complete that he half rose from his throne, and Maren beside him gave a small, strangled sound. "Elowen," Kyle said. "Mistress Vane," she corrected, "to this council. Lord Vael, you say you hold the largest share of the Draymore debt. You are mistaken. You hold perhaps a fifth. I hold the rest." She opened the ledger and laid the truth bare, claim by claim, and the hall gasped as the extent of it became clear that this unknown woman had quietly bought up nearly the entire debt of the ancient pack, that the fate of Draymore rested not in Sabin Vael's elegant hands, but in hers. "So before you speak again of forfeit and generosity, my lord, understand that nothing happens to this throne today that I do not permit." Sabin Vael recovered quickly. She gave him that. He turned the full weight of his charm and menace upon her, this unexpected rival, and he tried to negotiate, to intimidate, to buy her out, and she watched him with the same patience she had once watched Kale, and she refused him at every turn. He grew sharper. He made threats, veiled and then less veiled, about what his combine could do to a small free city house that crossed him. And Elowen, who had spent a month arranging exactly this moment, let him exhaust his threats, and then answered him with the quiet cold that had frightened better men than he. "You built this trap over years, Lord Vael," she said. "You watched and you waited, and you bought your debts one by one, and you were very proud of your patience. But you made one mistake. You assumed no one else was patient. You assumed no one else was watching. You built the gallows, my lord. I bought the lumber, and the rope, and the ground it stands on." She closed the ledger. "You hold a fifth of the debt. I will buy it from you, at fair value, today, and you will take your combine back down the river, and you will never again cast your eyes toward Draymore, because if you do, you will find that I have as long a memory and as deep a purse as you, and a great deal more reason to use them. That is my offer. It expires when I leave this hall." The whole of the great hall watched Sabin Vael weigh his ruin. He was a calculating man, and calculation told him the truth. He had been outmaneuvered, comprehensively, by someone who had seen his game and beaten him at it, and to fight now would cost more than he could win. His elegant composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for the pack to see the predator brought to heel. Then he inclined his head, the smallest possible bow, and accepted. Papers were signed, coin was pledged, and Sabin Vael, who had come to Draymore to conquer a kingdom, left it before nightfall with nothing but his fee and the bitter knowledge that a woman no one had heard of 6 months before had taken his prize out of his hands, and the greater antagonist who had loomed over the whole story walked out of it defeated by the very woman the smaller villain had thrown away. That left Kyle. The hall had emptied of the creditors and the combine, and settled into a tense, watchful quiet, the pack lingering along the walls because they sensed that the true reckoning had not yet come. Kyle had descended from his throne. He stood before Elowen now, and the 6 months, and the collapse and the humiliation had done their work on him, had stripped away the arrogant certainty and left something raw beneath, and when he looked at her, it was with an expression she had never once seen on his face in 2 years of marriage. Need. He needed her. His throne, his pack, his entire inheritance rested in her hands, and he knew it, and the knowing had brought the AlphaKing of Draymore to stand before his discarded bride like a supplicant. "Elowen," he said, and his voice had lost all its coldness now. "You saved us. You saved the pack. I don't understand how. I don't understand any of it. But you came back and you saved us. And that means—" He stopped, and she watched him reach for the old assumptions, the old certainty that she existed for his use, and she watched him find them and put them on like a familiar coat. "It means you never truly left. It means you understand your duty to this pack, to me. Come back. Take your place. We'll set Maren aside. It was a mistake. I see that now. I was a fool. You're the one who holds this throne together. You always were. Come home." There it was. The command dressed as an apology, the assumption that she had done all of this for him, that her power was simply a more spectacular form of her usefulness, that she would, of course, fold herself back into the shape of his need, now that he had deigned to want her. 6 months ago it might have broken her. Now she looked at him, this man she had once loved with the whole of an untouched heart, and she felt nothing but a distant, weary pity. "Take my place," she repeated softly. "Come home. Understand my duty." She let the words hang in the silent hall. "That doesn't work on me anymore, Kyle. None of it does. You called me a practice run. You said my only use was duty. You said it in the courtyard the night before our wedding, and I stood behind the pillar, and I heard every word. And I felt the bond you never once answered snap in my chest, and I left before dawn with nothing you ever gave me. I didn't save this pack for you. I saved it because it isn't yours to lose. It never really was. It belongs to the people along these walls who trusted the woman you overlooked, and to something you don't even know exists yet. And I would not let a spider like Sabin Vael devour their future to satisfy your pride." She stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear the next words. "You want to know how I did it? All of it. I did it because you taught me exactly what I was worth to you. And then I went and found out what I was worth to myself. It turns out the numbers were quite different." Kyle's face had gone white. Behind him, Maren had risen, and now she came forward, and here at last the replacement showed her true hollow self, because she didn't come in grief or contrition, but in fury, in the shrill panic of someone watching her stolen prize evaporate. She flung accusations, called Elowen a schemer, a liar, demanded to know how the elder sister had hidden such wealth and such treachery, and the more she raged, the more the pack along the walls drew back from her, seeing plainly the difference between the two sisters, the decorative one who screamed and the substantial one who had quietly held their world in her hands. Elowen did not raise her voice to answer. She simply looked at Maren until the tirade ran itself out, and then she said, "You wanted his throne. You have it. Sit on it and see how it holds you up." And Maren, who had traded her sister's ruin for a crown, understood at last that she had won an empty title over an empty treasury in an emptying hall, and that everyone in that hall now knew it. She fled the great hall in tears, and the pack watched her go without a single voice raised to stop her, and the replacement exited her story in exactly the disgrace her hollowness had earned. Then Elowen turned back to Kael, and she made her final disposition, and she made it not with cruelty, but with the terrible measured mercy that is the truest mark of the powerful. "Here is how it will be," she said. "I hold the debt of this pack, and I will not call it. Not today, not ever, so long as it is well managed. I will place the accounts in the hands of old Bram and a council of the border captains, honest people who love this pack, and I will oversee them from Varomir, and Draymore will recover, and its people will be safe, and its future will be secure. You will remain king in name, because a pack needs stability, and I will not throw its people into chaos to punish one man. But you will rule at my sufferance, and you will know it every day, and you will spend the rest of your life managing a throne you nearly lost through your own pride, answering to the woman you called a practice run. That is my mercy, Kael. It's more than you gave me. It's more than you deserve. And it is the last thing I will ever give you." She picked up her Eledger from the great table and closed it with a soft, final sound, and the sound seemed to travel the whole length of the ancient hall. Kael did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice had dropped to something Elowen had never heard from him in all their time together, low and cracked and stripped of everything but the truth. "You said something I don't understand," he said. "You said I saved the pack for something that doesn't know it exists yet. What did you mean?" She had wondered whether he would catch it. She had almost hoped he would not, because the answer belonged to her and to Rowan and to no one at Draymore, least of all the man who had thrown their mother away. But she had come here to end a chapter, not to leave a thread dangling that Kael could pull at for years, sending riders south, poisoning the quiet life she had built. So she gave him the truth, cleanly, the way she gave everything now, without flinching. "I left Draymore carrying your child," she said. The hall, which had thought itself already stunned into silence, went so still that Elowen could hear the banners stir in the high draft. Kael took a step back, as though she had struck him. His mouth opened and closed. 6 months of pride and collapse and dawning regret arranged themselves on his face into a single overwhelming realization. And she watched it land, watched the AlphaKing understand that the heir his line had prayed for through 2 barren years, the son that would have secured everything, had been growing beneath the heart of the woman he called a tool on the very night he discarded her, and that she had carried that heir out through the kennels in the dark and raised him for half a year in a city where Kael's name meant nothing. "A child," Kael said. "My child. My heir. You—" His voice broke entirely. "You've had my son for 6 months, and you never—" "He is not your heir," Elowen said, and she said it gently. But there was iron beneath the gentleness, iron she had forged over 6 months of nights alone with a fatherless infant, and a scar where a bond had been. He is my son. His name is Rowan. He was born in the winter, in a warm house full of people who wanted him, and he will grow up free and strong and beholden to no throne that threw his mother out in the cold. You will not see him. You will not send for him. You will not so much as speak his name, and if I ever learn that you have sent a single rider south to look for him, I will call every debt of this pack due in the same hour, and I will take Draymore apart stone by stone, and I will do it smiling. Do you understand me, Cale? He is the one thing in this world that is not for your use, and he is the one thing you will never touch. She watched the last of the arrogance die in him then. Whatever Cale Draymore had been, whatever cruelty and pride had led him to that courtyard, he was not a stupid man, and he understood that he had lost something that would never come back. Something infinitely larger than a treasury or a pack. He had a son he would never hold. He had a queen he had traded for a hollow woman who was even now fleeing his fortress in tears. He had a throne he would rule at the sufferance of the wife he had called a practice run, and he had brought every bit of it down upon himself with words spoken carelessly on a moonlit night, believing no one worth counting was listening. He sank down, not onto his throne, but onto the step below it, an AlphaKing brought to sit on the floor of his own hall, and he put his face in his hands, and the pack along the walls looked at him, and did not move to comfort him, and Elowen understood that his true punishment would not be anything she did, but the long, slow years of living inside the ruin of his own choices. She felt the pity again, distant and clean. She did not feel triumph. She had promised herself, on the mountain road 6 months ago, that she would not gloat, that she would not become in victory the kind of small, cruel thing that Kyle and Maren had been, and she kept that promise now. She simply picked up her ledger, and she turned, and she walked back up the length of the great hall. Old Bram was waiting near the great doors, and his weathered face was wet, and when she reached him, he bowed to her, deep and unashamed, the bow of a man to the true ruler of a place. I kept the charter, he said quietly. All those months, I hoped it would come to something. It came to everything, Elowen said, and for the first time that day, she let herself smile, small and real, and she took the old man's hand in both of hers. You'll manage the accounts now, Bram. You and the border captains. Honest hands. I'll come from Varomir to check the ledgers and to teach you the way of them, and this pack will be safe. You gave me the door out. Let me give you the pack back, whole. The old kennel master wept openly then, and she held his rough hand a moment longer, and then she stepped through the great doors of Draymore and out into the pale spring daylight, and she did not look back, just as she hadn't looked back on the night she fled. But this time, it was not grief that kept her eyes forward. It was that everything she wanted was to the south. Torvald was waiting with the horses in the courtyard, the same courtyard where a bond had snapped in the moonlight, and he looked at her face and read the whole of it there, the victory and the mercy and the weariness beneath. It's done, then, he said. It's done, she said. Take me home, Torvald. I want to see my son. They rode south through the mountain passes as the spring came green up the valleys, and with every mile the fortress of Draymore and the man who ruled it at her sufferance fell further behind and mattered less. She thought, as they rode, about the woman who had fled these roads in the dark half a year before, hollowed out and severed and carrying nothing but a vow and a secret, and she felt a tenderness toward that woman, and a fierce pride. That woman had not broken. That woman had built. Everything Elowen now held, the fortune and the fleet and the fate of an ancient pack, and above all the small, fierce life waiting for her in a warm house in Varomir. All of it had been earned in the dark by a discarded bride who refused to believe that her worth was whatever a cruel man decided to pay for it. They reached Varomir on the third day, as the sun was setting gold over the slate roofs, and Elowen did not stop at her warehouse or her counting house or any of the works that bore the name Mistress Vane. She rode straight to the modest house on the quiet street, and she was off the horse before it had fully stopped, and she was through the door, and Torvald's sister was there smiling and rising with a bundle in her arms, and then Rowan was in Elowen's arms, warm and heavy and grown even in the weeks she had been gone, and he looked up at her with his storm-grey eyes and made a small, delighted sound of recognition, and Elowen pressed her face into his dark hair and breathed him in, and felt the last cold corner of the scar in her chest fill with something warm and whole. "I have you," she whispered, the way she had whispered it the night he was born. "I have you. You're safe, and we are free. No one will ever throw us away again." Outside, the spring evening settled soft over the free city that had made her, over the river that carried her trade, over the life she had built with her own 2 hands out of the wreckage of a betrayal. And to the north, the AlphaKing sat in the ruin of his pride, and none of it could touch her, and none of it ever would. She stood a long while by the window with her son in her arms, and Torvald came to stand quietly nearby, and she did not have to explain to him what she felt, because he was a man who respected what she had built and had never once asked her to be less than she was. In time, perhaps, there would be more to say between them, something gentle and slow and freely chosen, the kind of thing she had thought she was choosing once and had been so terribly wrong about. But that was for later. That was hers to decide, on her own terms, in her own time, and the mere fact of that freedom was sweeter than any crown Draymore could have offered her. For now it was enough to stand in the warm lamplight with the child she had carried out of the dark, in the house she had bought against, exactly this day, a free woman in a free city, worth exactly what she had built, and every coin of it hers. Kyle Draymore had called her a practice run. He had believed, in his arrogance, that a person's value was a thing granted from above, doled out by those with power to those they deemed useful, and revoked the moment a better offer came along. He had learned, too late, and at ruinous cost, the truth that Elowen had proven with her own life, that worth is not granted by anyone. It is not handed down from a throne or conferred by a title or purchased with a wedding ring. It is built, quietly and stubbornly, in the dark hours when no one is watching, by those the world has underestimated. It is proven through resilience, and it is reclaimed, always and only, on one's own terms. Loyalty cannot be bought, and it cannot be commanded, and the moment you treat a devoted heart as a tool is the moment you begin to lose it forever. Elowen had walked out of a fortress with nothing but a vow and a secret, and she had built a kingdom of her own that no one could ever take, and the man who threw her away would spend the rest of his life learning exactly what he had let walk out his gates in the dark. If this story moved you, if you felt that bond snap and then felt it mend into something stronger, take a moment before you go. Give this video a like, because it tells us that stories about reclaiming your own worth are stories worth telling. Share it with someone in your life who needs the reminder that being discarded is not the end of their story, but the beginning of the one that's truly theirs. Someone who needs to hear that their value was never for anyone else to decide. Subscribe and join a community that celebrates the quiet, fierce, unbreakable people who refuse to stay down, because we have so many more of these high-stakes stories of betrayal and vindication to tell, and I want you here for every one of them. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment you knew Eloan was going to win? Was it the charter, the ledger, or the words she left with the old man at the door? I read every one, and I can't wait to hear where your heart turned.